In January 1823, 200 people boarded a ship in Scotland. They carried everything they owned. In their pockets, banknotes of a country called Poyais. In their luggage, official land certificates, signed by its ruler. Doctors, lawyers, bankers, respectable people, sailing across the Atlantic to start new lives in a paradise they had read about in books, seen on maps, and paid for with their life savings. There was only one problem. The country they were sailing to did not exist. No capital, no government, no Poyais, and the greatest lie ever sold. This is Dead Man's Ledger. Every great con begins with a grain of truth. Remember that, because you are about to watch a lie grow from one. Gregor MacGregor was born in Scotland in 1796 into the famous clan of Rob Roy, a name that already carried legend. At 16, he joined the British Army. He was ambitious, charming, and obsessed with rank and title. He bought his way up the officer ladder, married well, and strutted through Edinburgh society calling himself Sir, a title no one had actually given him. It was a small lie. Nobody checked. And Gregor MacGregor learned the lesson that would define his life: if you look the part, people rarely ask questions. In 1812, MacGregor sailed to South America and joined Venezuela's War of Independence. And here is the uncomfortable truth: he was good at it. He fought alongside the circle of Simón Bolívar himself. He led a famous fighting retreat that is still studied. He rose to the rank of general. The medals on his chest were real. Tabe. The battles were real. The hero's reputation was real. This matters because the strongest scaffolding for a great lie is a foundation of verifiable truth. When MacGregor spoke, people could check his story, and the first 3 chapters were all true. It was the final chapter he invented. In 1820, MacGregor arrived at the Mosquito coast, a stretch of Central America that was mostly swamp, jungle, and mosquitoes. The local ruler, King George Frederick Augustus, granted him a vast piece of territory, millions of acres of land. Land that was, in every practical sense, worthless. No roads. No farms. Most men would have seen a swamp. MacGregor saw a blank page, because back in London, nobody knew what the Mosquito coast looked like. And in the gap between what investors could imagine and what they could verify, an entire country could be built out of nothing but paper and confidence. MacGregor returned to London in 1814, but the man who stepped off the ship was no longer just a general. He introduced himself with a new title, one he had invented on the crossing: His Serene Highness Gregor I, Cazique of Poyais, Prince of a fertile, civilized, and entirely fictional nation. And London believed him. He was received in high society. He was, after all, a decorated war hero with documents, a land grant, and impeccable manners. If you look the part, people rarely ask questions. He looked the part perfectly. To understand what happened next, you need to understand London in the 1920s. Latin America was breaking free from Spain, and new nations were being born every year. British investors were desperate to fund them. Bonds from Colombia, Chile, Peru were selling like gold. Fortunes were being made on countries most investors could not find on a map. MacGregor did not invent this greed. He simply printed a country for it. In a market where nobody verified anything, the difference between a new nation and a fake one was, paperwork. And nobody in history has ever done paperwork like Gregor MacGregor. The scale of the fabrication is breathtaking. A 350-page guidebook about Poyais, written by a Captain Thomas Strangeways, who was MacGregor himself. It described the capital city of St. Joseph, its opera house, its cathedral, its parliament, its banks. He designed a national flag, a coat of arms, military uniforms. He established a fake honor system and sold knighthoods. He opened land offices in London and Edinburgh selling Poyais acres. And then he went one step further, the step that still stuns historians, surgeons. He printed money, official Poyais dollar banknotes, produced by a legitimate Scottish printer. You can still see them in museums today. Currency for a country that did not exist. In October 1822, MacGregor reached the summit. Through respectable city brokers, he issued a Poyais government loan on the London market, £200,000 sterling. In today's money, tens of millions. A sovereign bond, for a sovereign that existed only in a guidebook he had written himself. Investors bought it. The market treated Poyais paper like any other emerging nation's debt. Somewhere in a London ledger, a fictional country now had a real national debt. Let that sentence sit for a moment. But bonds were only half the scheme. MacGregor wanted settlers, living proof of his nation. He targeted his own people, Scots, hungry for land and a fresh start. He sold them plots of Poyais farmland. He promised jobs in the Poyais civil service. One man was appointed head of the National Bank. A humble shoemaker purchased the title of official shoemaker to the Princess of Poyais. And in the cruelest touch of all, MacGregor offered the emigrants a favor. They handed over their real money and boarded the ships with stacks of beautifully printed paper. On the 10th of September, 810-22, the Honduras packet left London with around 70 settlers. On the 22nd of January, 1823, the Kennersley Castle sailed from Scotland with 200 more. With 200 on board, families, professionals, a year of provisions, and total confidence. They sang on deck. They studied their guidebooks. They planned their new lives in St. Joseph, the gleaming capital waiting for them across the ocean. 2 months later, the lookout sighted the Mosquito coast. The settlers crowded the rails, searching the shoreline for the harbor, the lighthouse, the city. They saw trees, only trees. There was no St. Joseph, no opera house, no bank, no parliament. There was jungle, swamp, and a handful of hermits who had no idea what Poyaisian meant. The land certificates were worthless. The banknotes were worthless. The civil service titles were worthless. And then the rainy season came. Malaria and yellow fever swept the camp. The head of the non-existent National Bank dug graves. A grave. The official shoemaker to the Princess of Poyais, realizing everything he owned was printed fiction, took his own life. By the time rescue ships from British Honduras reached them, it was far too late for most. Of roughly 250 settlers who sailed to Poyais, more than half never came home. Now comes the part that psychologists still write about. When the survivors returned to Britain, broken and destitute, many of them refused to blame MacGregor. Some swore the Cazique had been deceived by his own agents. Others insisted Poyais was real, and they had simply landed in the wrong place. They had invested so much, money, hope, identity, that admitting the lie meant admitting they had built their lives on nothing. So they defended the man who had destroyed them. The con did not end when the truth came out. That is what makes a perfect con. The victims volunteered to keep it alive. The ledger, Poyais, 8A233, raised in bonds and land sales, over £200,000. Emigrants shipped, around 250. Emigrants dead, more than half. Years Gregor MacGregor spent in prison, 0. He fled to France and ran the exact same scheme again on French investors. He was arrested, tried, and acquitted. Years later he returned to Venezuela, where his war record earned him a general's pension. He died in Caracas in 1845 and was buried with full military honors. A state funeral. The settlers got a jungle. The investors got worthless paper. And the man who sold a country that never existed got a hero's grave. The ledger never balances. Subscribe. Next week, the ledger opens again.